Louis came to rest over a small landing pad. Once the hatch opened, I pushed Bart and Dana out of the way as I hurried to get out. I was still feeling a bit nauseous, but more importantly, I was eager to see the house, having dreamed of it for so long. My home sat across a small park, lined on both sides with mature maple and oak trees. They shaded the whole park except for where several sunbeams peeked through their branches. A barbecue was beside a picnic table and sitting at one corner beside the house. Oddly, I remembered coming out in the evening, hanging out with family and friends. I particularly loved such dinners in the fall, gathering around grilling after the leaves have turned red, brown, and golden as they fell from the trees. This area of the planet was semi-tropical, so it still had a short cooler fall season, a very colorful one. I remembered the trees dropping their leaves, and I remember raking them into small mountains in late autumn. Except for having to rake them up, they were great for throwing yourself headlong into the heaping piles, hoping you didn't leave the rake in an unfortunate place. Once we entered the park, I could see the house with its large bay windows facing us. From the corner of the landing pad, a stone path led to a walking bridge in the middle of the park. It crossed a small trickling creek and then continued from the bridge kitty corner to the front of the house. As we crossed the small bridge, I remembered how the creek, on early fall mornings, produced a mist that filled the park with an eerie character, almost as if something scary and unexpected was about to take place. I don't know what made me think of fall. Currently, the park was canvassed with several patches of sunshine lighting up the neatly mowed grass, and gardens that were scattered and in full bloom throughout the whole park. Several wooden benches with wrought iron accents were placed in perfect micro settings throughout for sitting. Once inside the house, I walked down a staircase into the living room. I was so overwhelmed I could barely move. Finally, I was looking through those bay windows facing the park. I've dreamed of looking out and sleeping in front of these windows since I first thought of Sierra. I imagined waking up to early morning sunbeams falling through the trees into the park. I felt like I was really home. 7 windows lined the outside wall. Each one was 20 feet high by 8 feet wide and divided by tall wooden columns. Each column reached to the ceiling and looked like half an arch. Every one of them was at least 2 feet wide and 6 feet deep and made of a single piece of carved wood. The wall at the other end was all large windows. They looked out onto a bay, a beautiful tropical bay. A stone fireplace sat in the right corner against the wall, just beyond the bay windows. The stonework went from floor to ceiling. Next to it was a set of wooden framed French doors with large glass inserts leading out onto a stone patio with raised brick gardens on both sides. The living room ceiling was at least 30 feet high and made of tongue and groove natural walnut. The floor was polished natural fitted wooden planks with inlaid teak. Several woven rugs were placed around the room. A couch and coffee table sat near the fireplace, facing the windows overlooking the bay. I often imagined myself sitting on the couch, looking out over the water, especially at sunset and into the night. I recall sitting there for hours watching the sun go down, with the fire lit. I had such warm thoughts of how it was such a beautiful picture in my mind. A loft was on the left side. It hung over a third of the living room. The kitchen and bedrooms were on the upper level. The loft ran the full length of the room with a 4-foot carved banister keeping anyone from falling off. The loft was used as half dining and half sitting area. A table with 12 chairs sat outside the kitchen. Beyond the dining room was a sitting area with 3 couches, end tables, and several art displays. I remembered sitting up there, reading and listening to music. As I stood in front of the windows, I thought of many other details regarding this house, regarding Sierra. I knew most of the places and people in my dreams, but other memories were coming from some place outside my dreams. Memories of different people, places, and events filled my mind, ones that were never a part of my daydreams. I didn't have a clue where they came from, but my mind was bathing in them. Some even caused a certain amount of anxiety. I stood wonderstruck as I stared out into the park. Right away, I determined all of my thoughts were part of the experience. From then on, I will try to accept whatever memories should come and resist the stress. I should let them be what they are, memories. Mine or someone else's didn't matter. I figured I would have to get used to them. My home on the bay, in the little town of Somnolent, French for sleepy, was on the north shore of Clare Island. Clare Island was situated in a chain of islands, every one of which connected and wrapped around the whole planet of commerce near the equator. My home there, although modest compared to the homes of many other inhabitants of Sierra, was a comfortable, relaxing home. I loved everything about it. I heard a knock at the door. It was Jack. "Hello, Jeff," he said as he grabbed my hand to shake it. "Well, hello, Jack. What brings you this way? Is this another vision?" He gave me a strange look. "No. I came by to hang out. I thought I could be of some help, understanding your current condition." The only time I have interacted with Jack so far was while I was reading the book, so I wasn't sure if he was actually here in person. I guess he was not a vision this time, but Jack in person, and apparently, he knew what was going on. I guess he read the notebook too. I was wondering if you were a ghost. You can assist for sure, but first I'm starving. I recently fed my lunch to a bucket. So, I should eat. I was making an attempt at being normal. Just then, Dana came down the stairs. She asked what we wanted to eat. I said to surprise us. She returned up the stairs into the kitchen. Bart brought out a small table with 2 chairs and set them on the patio. Afterward, Dana came walking through the room carrying 2 plates of food with 2 sodas and set them on the table. Dana prepared steaks for both of us. After a few bites, I said, "You know, Jack, this is the best steak I have ever eaten." As I said so, I recalled another memory. I realized it wasn't real meat. No one ate meat any longer. Well, no one killed and ate animals any longer. Farmers grew meat like one grows strawberries, cucumbers, or watermelons. Scientists developed a seed called mDNA seeds. They feed the seeds to all the different animals. Once inside, the seeds copied the DNA of different selections of flesh from each animal. One seed might pick up the backstrap, another, the tenderloin, or the ribs, etc. Then the seeds turned a specific color based on whatever part of the animal they reproduced. After the animal passed them, the farmers collected the seeds and cleaned them. Once cleaned, they planted the seeds and grew specific cuts targeted within the individual animal. No one could tell the difference. In fact, the meat produced from the new method tastes many times better than the meat produced by the old-fashioned method. Although the plants those seeds produced were some strange-looking plants. I said, "I love meat." "Me too." Then, I asked Jack about the memories, and why I had them. I am flooded with memories, someone else's memories, I presume, and they're quite random. Do you know why that is? Not really. What kinds of things do you remember, or what memories are flooding your head? Well, when we pulled up to the yard, I remembered having BBQs in the small park beside the house, with friends in the fall. I saw some of those faces in my mind, yet I didn't recall their names. I remembered the leaves falling and how I raked them into large piles. It felt like I lived here for ages. As I took a bite of my steak, I remembered all about meat farming, and cedar. I knew the meat came from cedar. These were thoughts of Sierra itself, ones I had not considered before, and I knew they were true, just different things coming into my mind. I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't. I'll give it some thought, and I'm sure we will figure it out. At first, I was bothered by them, but now, I'm working on accepting them without falling apart. Neither one of us said any more about it. I knew we'd have this conversation again. To change the subject, I mentioned, I wonder what cedar is like this time of year. Just like anywhere else. I guess it depends on where on cedar you are referring to. Cedar was the agricultural planet of Sierra. It's called cedar because of the giant cedar trees which grow in the forest there. The trees are at least 40 feet in diameter and stand 200 to 300 feet tall, with the most colorful wood. The columns between the windows and the flooring in the living room are from those cedar trees, and the wood grain itself comes in shades of deep blue to blood red. Loggers cut them at 2 feet from the base where a dark brown natural line forms, which is how the loggers knew a tree was ready to harvest. After cutting, trained graders looked for a small indent in the stump's middle where they placed a seed from that same tree. The seed grew out from the center to the edge of the bark and then shot up to 300 feet high. The color of the wood depended on the color of the seed the logger placed in its center. Each tree produced several colored seeds. It was only a 10-year process, at which time the tree was ready to harvest again. Loggers who logged the trees traveled from place to place harvesting them, and there were several hundred groups of loggers. Each group used a 10-year rotation and harvest plan, which brought them back to an area every 10 years. Many of the loggers held similar jobs back on Earth. I guess once logging gets in one's blood, it's hard to do anything else. When asked, every logger would tell you their favorite place, without reservation, would be in the dense forest surrounded by the smell of fresh cut wood. Each logging crew comprised at least 100 men, both men and AI, called specials. The crew might include only 20 humans. The rest of the 100-man crew comprised specials. I remembered each crew used the specific model of AI, special. Those specials looked like hefty men who stood 9 feet tall with enormous beards and bald heads. The humans said the model was perfect for working in the forest, although those bald heads could blind a man when the sun reflected just right. Some foremen make them wear ball caps for the safety of the other crew. Loggers, along with their families, generally lived in tents, traveling around cedar, harvesting the trees. Some built cabins in harvest areas for when they returned, but most lived in the tents. It was amusing as each tent appeared bigger on the inside. I remembered being invited into one logger's home. He and his family lived in one of the tents. Once inside, I was surprised how the inside looked like a large log cabin. Every wall was of beautiful logs running the full length of the cabin. The whole inside had a beautiful reddish golden tint. It was extraordinary. I thought about how everyone has their place in Sierra. One group of people preferred living one way. Another group preferred living another. I could not imagine living as the loggers do. It was common knowledge throughout the universe that it was more desirable to be content rather than important. Yet everybody was important in God's kingdom. I recalled another memory, whether true. Whenever I came across a group of these loggers, I had a wonderful time laughing at their dumb jokes, along with them, for hours. I recalled good things about each one. They are among the most gracious people. You could always tell when they were in the area by the enormous transportation vehicles hovering over a logging site, a large craft with cranes to hoist fresh-cut timber onto its deck. It was a tremendous operation. The craft looked like oversized airborne barges, each able to hold up to 100 of the large logs. Once the barge filled up, it hauled the timber off to the different sawmills, or pulp mills depending on the end products. Several mills could cut the cedars into sizable cants. A construction project might use cants up to 20 by 20 by 200 feet long. If there were no orders for the cants, they delivered them to different mills to cut them into smaller size domestic cuts for buildings, furniture, paneling, etc. Each mill cut several billion board feet annually. Log mills cut hundreds of different varieties of wood, such as walnut, pine, birch, along with others rivaling the beauty of the cedar trees. Without comparison, the cedars are the tallest, most plentiful trees on cedar, which made them significant. So, cedar was an appropriate name for the planet. Even though the cedars were significant, there were two larger trees than the cedar tree. One was the redwood. Redwood trees grew on the moon Givu, along the Hassan River, and the planet Mosswood along the Green Coast. The redwood had a circumference up to 150 feet and stood up to 500 feet tall. The Green Coast redwoods were cut and milled on the planet Mosswood only. They are not as plentiful as the cedar tree. They only used redwood trees to build within certain areas where the climate was predominantly wet and cold. The ones on Givu were not harvested. The other one was called the stone tree. It only grew on the planet Sirius. Sirius was not one of the habitable planets. It has a 43-hour day. Those long days can screw up a person's routine. So, no one lived there, but many visited the planet. The trees themselves were a quarter-mile in circumference. No one knows how old they are. Some have become petrified, hence the name stone. When they become petrified, they look like large quartz crystals. They are beautiful when caught by the sun. Also, they're too large to cut, and the wood was similar to iron bark. Even the diamond tip saw had a hard time cutting them. There was no use for them. Now, the planet Cedar also includes all the major farms and ranches in Sierra. In the beginning, when humans first settled Sierra, various kinds of special AI along with the messengers built houses, barns, and outbuildings. Afterward, they developed the land for farming and raising livestock. Then another type of AI called companions maintained them until people could take over, helping the humans ease into life here in Sierra. Eventually, people took over and fended for themselves. It was hard to comprehend all the memories that were flooding my head, along with a million questions. I asked Jack, I perceive it's not the early years here in Sierra. What's the date? The year is M206. You know, I read the notebook. I know you have been to several time periods covering different events in history. Well, history for me, the future for you. You landed in this time, this year, for a reason. What reason is that? You needed to see Sierra in its fullness. Currently, Sierra is operating at full force, peak capacity. It will do so for another 794 years. You and I are two of Sierra's leaders. You are first in command. I'm one of two of your assistants, but in your current state, you cannot fulfill your duties. Okay, thanks. You read the book, huh? He didn't answer. I looked down at my meal, contemplating. When I lifted my head, we were sitting at the same table in the middle of an expansive wheat field, under a large old oak tree. Golden wheat flowed into a deep blue sky in every direction. You asked about Cedar. Well, welcome to Cedar. You will have come here a million times, but I assume it's new to you right now. Many farms here are the size of small countries, and others might be little family 10-acre farms. I was more interested in why popping around didn't make me sick. Unlike when leaving academy, I felt fine. Jack stood up and threw his arms up. I love it. I stood up because I felt compelled to walk out into the field. Both of us walked out into the wheat field. I turned back to look at the oak tree, only to see two raccoons stealing my dinner. Where did they come from? The little monsters grabbed my steak and took off up the tree. Jack looked at me. Well, you snooze, you lose. Raccoons are the consummate little bandits, aren't they? He laughed. I laughed. I knew there was plenty more where that came from. We started back towards the tree to our dinner when I was transported to the front door of a small stucco single-story cottage. The cottage was painted white with an unusual front door and windows on either side, each one rounded at the top. A small circular stained glass window was a foot above the door. The frames of the door, the windows, and the gutters were painted dark green. Vegetation grew up at both corners of the house. The front yard was bordered by the thick covering of those same shrubs and trees lining both sides and hovered over most of the yard. I could only see a small sliver of blue sky above, down the middle. The yard extended 75 feet out from the front of the house and ended at an inland ocean. I observed several islands with mountains not too far away across the water. The sun was setting right between two of the islands. Nothing but the ocean's horizon could hide it. It reminded me of the inland waters of southeast Alaska, but warm and tropical. On each side of the yard sat long tables placed next to the vegetation. Every table was set for a picnic. Several kinds of bowls with fruit, salads, and drinks sat in the center of each table. Apparently, someone was having a barbecue in their front yard. Because the sun was setting, the whole scene appeared golden from its light. The yard was warm with a cool breeze meandering up from the water. I looked down and noticed I was wearing the chef's apron. I guess I was having the barbecue. A little to the right of me was a lit grill with one steak cooking. I thought to myself, only one. Then I recognized this place. I dreamed of it even before my coming here. Often, I saw myself in this, and other places, all of them were so real. It used to bother me. Perhaps it might have been an out-of-body experience, which often troubled me. It might include an orchard, a garden, a beach, or any place seen in my mind. I sensed the elements of each place. For example, if it were an orchard, I could smell the fruit, the damp earth, the trees, the coolness, etc. These experiences were mind-bending, powerful events. I often wondered if they could be real places. Was I seeing something supernatural? I knew this property was one of those places, and I remember seeing my family coming to this house for a barbecue. I looked around and took note the chairs were empty. Standing there by myself, I imagined my children, how this place was for them, how Sierra was for them, how heaven was for them, how it would be forever. I had a horrible thought. How can heaven be so wonderful if any one of my children or grandchildren were not here to share it with me? How can that be? I remembered reading in the Bible where God said He'd wipe away all of our tears. I couldn't understand what that meant at the moment. How could my tears find relief if I lose even one child? My tears would be inconsolable. I looked again at the tables with their empty seats. A heartfelt sadness came over me as I filled each one with a face, young, innocent children. I called out to God for each vacant setting at the table. Attempting to deal with the emotions, I became overwhelmed. I was there for a long time. I spent most of it interceding and praying, which was the only way to deal with my feelings. I understood heaven was the only place where we can find that which truly matters. Everything else was just common. I sensed hope as I calmed down, knowing God feels the same way I do, even more so. Afterward, I turned to look at the burning meat. As I walked over to the barbecue, I tripped only to find myself on the ground of the patio, which lent itself to my frustration. I didn't even comment on the fact of being tired of falling on my face. Apparently, I was gone only a moment. How could that be possible? I picked myself up saying nothing and walked over to the end of the patio to look out over the ocean, a tear still in my eye. I stood there for a while. No one bothered me. Somehow, Jack understood and went inside to leave me to myself. My thoughts turned to the sunset, how stunning it looked, like a painting as the sky faded from dark blue to a yellow-orange setting sun. Silver and pinkish clouds floated near the horizon. The distinct outlines of 3 moons were rising into the night sky. All of it reflecting on the ocean, which blended magically from light green to bluish gray. I gathered myself, walked back inside, noticing the sunlight coming through the windows, golden yellow. It felt soothing. I found comfort in its warmth. Afterward, Jack and I talked for a while. We talked about my adventure up to that point. I bragged about the fishing on the lake. He looked at me and said, "You might need some sleep, my friend. I bet you still like to sleep. I assumed you had a couple of exciting days. Tomorrow, we can walk into town. I'll show you what drew you to live here in Somnolent." So, I walked him to the front door to say a proper goodbye. As I turned around to go back down the stairway, I saw Dana putting the finishing touches on a bed placed in front of one window overlooking the park. It was still early evening, but I laid down. Even though my mind was full of the events since landing in Sierra, I fell asleep quickly.